The rope would hang him at dawn, unless someone could prove that Dawson Kane had never pulled the trigger that killed Henry Marlowe on that dusty July evening in 1883. Zelda Larkin felt the baby kick inside her belly as she stared at the small adobe jailhouse in Apache Junction, Arizona. Her hands trembling against the reins of the horse she had ridden through 40 miles of unforgiving desert to reach this place before the trial ended. She had left Silver Creek at midnight, riding through darkness with only starlight to guide her path, every muscle in her body screaming against the journey while her 6-month pregnant belly pressed against the saddle horn. The summer heat had begun its daily assault even before the sun fully rose, turning the landscape into shimmering waves of impossible temperature. Her dress clung to her skin with sweat. Her throat felt like sandpaper despite the canteen she had drained hours ago, and her lower back throbbed with a pain that made her vision blur at the edges. But none of that mattered, because an innocent man would die if she did not speak the truth. The town of Apache Junction sprawled before her like a mirage made real, with its wooden storefronts and dusty streets already filling with morning activity, despite the early hour. She could see the courthouse at the far end of the main street, a 2-story structure that seemed to loom over everything else with the weight of its authority. People moved along the wooden sidewalks, going about their business, completely unaware that justice was about to hang an innocent man. Zelda's legs nearly buckled when she slid from the saddle, catching herself against the horse's flank with both hands. The world tilted sideways for a moment before righting itself. She had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, and the baby inside her rolled and kicked as if protesting the harsh treatment. She pressed one hand to her belly, whispering a soft apology to the child who would never know its father if things continued as planned. "Madam, you look about ready to collapse." The voice came from beside her, deep and concerned. A man with a badge pinned to his vest stepped forward, his weathered face creased with worry. "You need to see a doctor." "I need to see the judge," Zelda said, forcing strength into her voice despite the weakness in her knees. "The trial for Dawson Kane, when does it start?" The deputy's expression shifted to something guarded. "Started an hour ago, should be wrapping up soon. That killer will hang before noon." "He is not a killer." The words came out sharper than she intended, but Zelda could not afford politeness right now. "I have testimony that will prove his innocence. I need to speak at that trial." The deputy studied her with obvious skepticism, his gaze dropping to her swollen belly and back up to her dust-covered face. "You rode far, 40 miles from Silver Creek, through the night and morning. Please, I must speak before they reach a verdict." Something in her desperation must have convinced him because he nodded slowly. "Come with me, but I cannot promise the judge will allow additional testimony at this stage." The courthouse steps seemed impossibly steep as Zelda climbed them, each movement sending sharp pains through her abdomen and lower back. She could feel wetness between her legs and prayed it was just sweat, not the early signs of labor that every pregnant woman feared. The baby was not due for 3 more months, and the thought of losing this child, the only piece of love she had left, made her throat tighten with fear. Inside the courthouse, the air felt stifling despite the thick adobe walls designed to keep out the heat. The courtroom occupied the entire 2nd floor, and Zelda could hear voices drifting down the staircase as the deputy led her upward. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption." The deputy's voice cut through the proceedings as he pushed open the courtroom door. "But this woman claims to have crucial testimony regarding the defendant." Every head in the room turned toward her, and Zelda felt the weight of dozens of stares. She scanned the faces until she found him. seated at a rough wooden table with his hands chained together, his dark hair hanging into eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness. Dawson Kane looked thinner than she remembered, his face gaunt and shadowed with several days of beard growth, but when their eyes met across the room, she saw recognition flare in his expression, followed immediately by horror. Zelda. He spoke her name like a prayer and a curse combined, rising from his seat despite the chains. "My God, what are you doing here? You should not have come." "Sit down, Mr. Kane," the judge ordered from his elevated bench. He was an older man with silver hair and a stern expression that suggested he did not appreciate interruptions. His gaze moved to Zelda, assessing her with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every type of person pass through his courtroom. "Young lady, this trial is nearly concluded. The prosecution and defense have both rested their cases. Unless you have information that directly pertains to this matter, I cannot allow further testimony." Zelda stepped forward, ignoring the way the room seemed to spin slightly around her. "Your Honor, my name is Zelda Larkin. I was in Apache Junction on the evening of July 15th when Henry Marlowe was shot. I can testify to Dawson Kane's whereabouts at the time of the murder because he was with me." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor, a thin man with a waxed mustache and calculating eyes, rose from his seat with an expression of barely concealed triumph. "Your Honor, this woman's condition makes her relationship to the defendant quite clear. Of course she would lie to save him. Her testimony is worthless, the desperate attempt of a fallen woman to save her lover." Heat flooded Zelda's cheeks, but she held her ground. "I am not lying, and my relationship to Mr. Kane does not change the facts. He could not have killed Henry Marlowe because he was with me at the general store when we heard the gunshot. We both ran toward the sound, along with half the town, and found Mr. Marlowe already dead in the alley behind the saloon." "Convenient that you only now come forward with this information," the prosecutor sneered. "Where have you been for the past 3 weeks while this case was being prepared?" "I was in Silver Creek, 40 miles from here. I only learned of the trial yesterday when a traveling merchant mentioned it. I left immediately and rode through the night to get here in time." The judge studied her with an intensity that made Zelda feel transparent. "You rode 40 miles in your condition through the desert?" "Yes, Your Honor." "That was extraordinarily foolish and dangerous." "Perhaps. But not as dangerous as allowing an innocent man to hang for a crime he did not commit." Dawson made a sound somewhere between a groan and a protest. "Zelda, you could have lost the baby. You should not have risked it, not for me." She turned to look at him fully for the first time, seeing the anguish in his face, the way his chained hands clenched into fists. "If you hang, this child loses its father. That seemed a greater risk than a hard ride." The admission sent another wave of murmurs through the courtroom. The prosecutor looked like Christmas had come early. "So you admit the child is his. This proves my point about her bias, Your Honor." But the judge held up one hand for silence, his expression thoughtful. "I am more interested in the specifics of her testimony than her relationship to the defendant. Miss Larkin, please approach the witness stand." Relief flooded through Zelda so powerfully that her knees wobbled. The deputy who had escorted her inside moved forward to help her into the witness box, and she gratefully accepted his arm. Once seated, she placed both hands on her belly, drawing strength from the life growing inside her. The judge administered the oath, and Zelda swore to tell the truth with her hand on the Bible, meaning every word. Then he nodded for her to continue. "Tell me exactly what happened on the evening of July 15th, starting from when you first encountered Mr. Kane." Zelda took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. I arrived in Apache Junction that afternoon on the stage from Silver Creek. I was visiting because Dawson had written me a letter asking me to come. We had known each other in Silver Creek, where he had worked as a ranch hand, and we had formed an attachment. An attachment that resulted in pregnancy, the prosecutor interjected. Yes, Zelda said simply, refusing to be shamed. When I arrived, Dawson met me at the stage depot. We walked through town together, talking, and he bought me dinner at the small restaurant near the general store. Afterward, around 7 in the evening, we went to the general store because I wanted to purchase some fabric. The proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, can verify we were there. Mrs. Henderson has already testified that her store was open until 8 that evening, the judge confirmed. Continue. While we were looking at fabrics, we heard a gunshot. It was very loud and seemed to come from somewhere nearby. Dawson immediately told me to stay inside where it was safe, but I followed him anyway. Several other people came running from different directions, all heading toward the alley behind the Silver Dollar Saloon. When we got there, we found Henry Marlowe lying on the ground with a bullet wound in his chest. He was already dead. What time was this? Shortly after 7:30. The sun was setting, but there was still good light. And did you see anyone fleeing the scene? No, Your Honor. The alley was empty except for Mr. Marlowe's body. Marshal Garrett arrived within minutes and began questioning everyone who had gathered. That was when someone said they had seen Dawson arguing with Mr. Marlowe earlier that day. The prosecutor stood again. Because the defendant did argue with the victim earlier that day. Multiple witnesses testified to hearing Mr. Kane threaten Mr. Marlowe's life over a gambling debt. Dawson's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Zelda could see the frustration in every line of his body. Dawson did have an argument with Mr. Marlowe, Zelda confirmed. He told me about it at dinner. Mr. Marlowe had cheated him in a card game the previous week, and Dawson confronted him about it that afternoon. But angry words are not the same as murder, and Dawson could not have shot Mr. Marlowe when he was standing beside me in the general store. Unless you are lying to protect him, the prosecutor said smoothly. Tell me, Miss Larkin, what happened after Mr. Marlowe's body was discovered? If Mr. Kane was innocent, why did you not immediately tell Marshal Garrett that he had been with you? The question hit like a physical blow because Zelda had asked herself the same thing 1,000 times over the past 3 weeks. Because I was frightened, she admitted, her voice dropping. When the marshal started asking questions, I panicked. I was unmarried and pregnant in a town where I knew almost no one, with a man who was being accused of murder. I thought if I spoke up, it would make things worse. I thought someone else would come forward to confirm Dawson's innocence. And then the stage left the next morning, and my aunt, who had accompanied me, insisted we return to Silver Creek immediately. I argued with her, but she said we could not be associated with a murder investigation. She forced me onto the stage, and by the time I realized my mistake, I was already gone. Shame heated her face as she spoke the words aloud. She had been a coward, plain and simple, and that cowardice had nearly cost Dawson his life. So you fled, the prosecutor said with satisfaction. You abandoned Mr. Kane to his fate and only came back when your conscience became inconvenient. I came back because I learned he was going to hang for something he did not do, Zelda shot back, anger giving her voice strength. And I came back despite knowing that my testimony might not be believed, despite the danger to my unborn child, despite the certainty that people would judge me for my condition and my relationship with Dawson. I came back because the truth matters more than my comfort or my reputation. The courtroom had gone silent. Even the prosecutor seemed momentarily at a loss for words. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying Zelda with an expression she could not read. Your Honor, Dawson said quietly, breaking the silence. "Miss Larkin is telling the truth about being with me at the general store, but I want it on record that I never asked her to come here today. I never asked her to risk herself or the baby. If you choose not to believe her testimony, that is your right, but do not doubt her courage or her character." Something in his words made Zelda's eyes burn with unshed tears. Even now, facing death, Dawson was trying to protect her. The judge cleared his throat. "I am going to call a recess while I verify certain facts. Deputy, please send someone to fetch Mrs. Henderson from the general store. I want to question her about the timing of Miss Larkin and Mr. Kane's visit. Court will resume in 1 hour." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and suddenly everyone was moving. Zelda tried to stand, but her legs refused to cooperate. The room tilted dangerously, and she gripped the edge of the witness stand to keep from falling. "Easy now." Strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her. She looked up into Dawson's face, somehow there beside her despite the chains and the deputy trying to pull him back toward the defendant's table. His dark eyes searched hers with desperate intensity. "Zelda, you have to sit down before you collapse. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday afternoon." "But I am fine." "You are not fine. You look like you are about to faint." He turned toward the deputy, his voice taking on a commanding tone despite his position as the accused. "This woman needs water and food immediately. She rode 40 miles pregnant to get here. If something happens to her because of neglect in this courthouse, I will make sure everyone knows it." The deputy looked uncertain, glancing between them. Finally, he nodded. "I will have someone bring water and food, but you need to come back to your cell, Kane. Let me help her down first." With surprising gentleness given his shackled hands, Dawson helped Zelda descend from the witness stand and guided her to a bench against the wall. His touch sent familiar warmth through her body, memories of better times flooding back. She remembered the first time they had met, at a barn dance in Silver Creek 6 months ago. Dawson had been working at the Morrison Ranch then, a skilled horseman who had drifted into town looking for work. He had asked her to dance, and she had said yes, drawn by his quiet confidence and the kindness in his eyes. What had started as a single dance had become a courtship. He had called on her properly, bringing flowers picked from the meadow beyond town, talking with her father about horses and cattle, and the weather. Her family had not been wealthy, but they were respectable, and her father had tentatively approved of the cowboy who seemed so sincere in his affection for Zelda. Then Dawson had received word that his mother was ill in Phoenix, and he had left quickly to see her, promising to return. When he came back 3 weeks later, he had stopped in Apache Junction on his way home to Silver Creek, planning to work a few days to earn money before completing the journey. That was when everything had fallen apart. "I am sorry," Dawson said quietly, breaking into her thoughts, "for all of this. For not being more careful, for putting you in this position, for everything." Zelda shook her head, reaching up to touch his face despite the people watching. "Do not apologize for our child. I would not trade this baby for anything, not even to go back and change everything. But you deserve better than this. You deserve a man who can give you a proper life, not one waiting to hang. You are not going to hang. I will make them believe me. Zelda." He said her name with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. "Even if they believe you, even if they let me go, what then? Your reputation is ruined. Your family will disown you. You will be raising a child alone with everyone in Silver Creek knowing you are an unwed mother. Then I will go somewhere else, somewhere no one knows me. I can work, I can take care of myself and the baby, or you could marry me." The words hung in the air between them. Zelda stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What? If I walk out of here a free man, marry me. I know I have nothing to offer you right now except my name and my promise to work hard for you and our child. But I love you, Zelda. I have loved you since that first dance in Silver Creek when you laughed at my terrible joke and did not even pretend to find me impressive. Marry me, and let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Tears spilled down Zelda's cheeks before she could stop them. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, but only if you promise to stop talking about hanging and start believing we have a future together." A smile transformed his face, making him look younger despite the ordeal of the past 3 weeks. He leaned forward as if to kiss her, but the deputy clearing his throat stopped him. "Kane, you need to come with me now. Miss Larkin, someone is bringing you food and water." Dawson squeezed her hand once before allowing himself to be led away. Zelda watched him go, her hand pressed against her belly where their child rested, and silently prayed that the judge would see the truth. The hour passed with agonizing slowness. A woman from the restaurant brought Zelda bread, cheese, and cold chicken along with a large pitcher of water. Zelda ate mechanically, knowing the baby needed nourishment even though her stomach felt too tight with nerves to properly appreciate the food. Other women in the courtroom stared at her with expressions ranging from pity to disgust, and she tried to ignore them all. When the judge finally returned and called the court back to order, Mrs. Henderson accompanied him. The older woman walked to the witness stand with her gray head held high, her no-nonsense expression suggesting she had little patience for foolishness. After being sworn in, the judge asked her directly, "Mrs. Henderson, do you recall the evening of July 15th? "I do, Your Honor." "It was the night Henry Marlowe was shot. Do you recall seeing Miss Larkin and Mr. Kane in your store that evening?" Mrs. Henderson's gaze moved to Zelda, and something softened in her expression. "I do. They came in around 7 o'clock, maybe a few minutes after. The young lady wanted to look at fabrics, and Mr. Kane was with her. They were in my store when we heard the gunshot, must have been around 7:30 or thereabouts. I remember because I had been about to close up for the evening but had stayed open a bit later to help them." "And you are certain about the timing?" "Absolutely certain. I heard the shot while they were still in my store. The young lady got very pale, and Mr. Kane told her to stay put while he went to see what had happened. She did not listen, of course, and ran after him. I followed as well, and we all ended up in that alley where poor Henry was lying dead. Why did you not come forward with this information during the investigation?" Mrs. Henderson's expression turned stern. "Because Marshal Garrett never asked me. He questioned people who were near the saloon, but nobody thought to ask the shopkeepers what they had seen or heard. If I had known Mr. Kane was being accused, I would have spoken up sooner. I do not hold with hanging innocent men, regardless of what arguments they might have had earlier in the day." The prosecutor stood, his confident demeanor showing cracks. "Mrs. Henderson, is it possible you are mistaken about the timing? Perhaps Mr. Kane visited your store earlier and then went to the alley afterward." "Young man, I have been running that store for 23 years. I know how to tell time, and I know what I saw. Those two were in my store when the shot was fired. If Mr. Kane killed Henry Marlowe, he would have needed to be in 2 places at once, and I do not believe in magic." A few people in the courtroom laughed despite the serious nature of the proceedings. The prosecutor's face reddened, but he had no further questions. The judge dismissed Mrs. Henderson and sat in silence for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Finally, he spoke. "I have heard testimony from both sides in this case. The prosecution's case rests primarily on the argument between Mr. Kane and the victim earlier on the day of the murder, along with the fact that Mr. Kane's weapon matched the caliber of bullet that killed Mr. Marlowe. However, No witness actually saw Mr. Kane fire the weapon, and now we have credible testimony placing him elsewhere at the time of the murder. He paused, his gaze moving between Zelda and Dawson. Miss Larkin, your decision to come forward took considerable courage, even if it came later than it should have. Mrs. Henderson's testimony corroborates your account. While I am troubled by the initial lack of forthcoming information, I cannot in good conscience allow this execution to proceed when there is reasonable doubt about Mr. Kane's guilt. Zelda's breath caught in her throat. Therefore, I am dismissing all charges against Dawson Kane effective immediately. Mr. Kane, you are free to go. However, I strongly suggest you leave Apache Junction and find honest work elsewhere, as the Marlowe family may not be as convinced of your innocence as this court. The gavel came down, and suddenly the courtroom erupted in noise. Some people cheered while others protested. The prosecutor slammed his papers down on his table in frustration. But Zelda heard none of it because Dawson was moving toward her, the deputy removing his chains, and then his arms were around her as much as her belly would allow. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you for saving my life." Zelda clung to him, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with relief and exhaustion and overwhelming emotion. "I told you I would make them believe me. You rode 40 miles pregnant through the desert. You are the bravest person I have ever met. Or the most foolish, according to the judge. Brave," he insisted, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. "Definitely brave." This time, when he leaned down to kiss her, no deputy stopped him. His lips met hers with a tenderness that made her forget they were standing in a crowded courtroom, forget the stares and whispers, forget everything except the fact that he was alive and they had a future together. When they finally broke apart, the courtroom had mostly emptied. The judge had retired to his chambers, and the deputy was waiting by the door with an expression that suggested they should leave quickly. "We need to get you somewhere you can rest properly," Dawson said, studying her face with concern. "You look exhausted." "I am exhausted," Zelda admitted. "But we need to figure out what to do next. The judge said you should leave Apache Junction." "We should leave," he corrected. "You are not going anywhere without me, and I am not letting you ride 40 miles back to Silver Creek alone, especially not after what you just put your body through. My family is in Silver Creek. Your family forced you onto a stage and made you leave me to face a murder charge alone. Are they really going to welcome you back now that everyone knows you are carrying my child?" The question hurt because Zelda knew the answer. Her aunt had made her feelings perfectly clear during the stage ride back to Silver Creek 3 weeks ago. She had called Zelda foolish and ruined, had said no respectable man would ever want her now, had warned that the family's reputation would suffer if people knew about the baby. When Zelda had tried to defend Dawson, her aunt had grown even angrier, insisting that cowboys who got accused of murder were obviously bad news regardless of their actual guilt. "No," Zelda said quietly. "They probably will not welcome me back. Then we will go somewhere else. Somewhere we can start fresh where nobody knows us. I have some money saved, not much but enough to get us somewhere better. We could go to California, find work there, build a life together. California." The word sounded like a dream, a promise of something better. Zelda had never been further west than Arizona, had never imagined leaving the desert landscape she had known her whole life. But the thought of starting over somewhere new, somewhere she and Dawson could be married and raise their child without the weight of scandal and judgment, filled her with unexpected hope. "California," she repeated, testing the word. "That is very far." "Too far." He searched her face anxiously. "I know it is a lot to ask. If you want to try going back to Silver Creek first to see if your family will accept you, I understand." "No," Zelda shook her head firmly. You are right. My aunt made her feelings clear, and my parents will likely agree with her. I do not want to raise our child somewhere we are not wanted. California sounds perfect. Relief and joy lit up Dawson's expression. He kissed her again, quick and fierce, before taking her hand. Then let us get married right now before we leave Apache Junction. I want you to be my wife before we start this journey together. Right now, there must be a preacher in this town, and I have the money for a marriage license. Unless you want to wait. Zelda thought about it for all of 3 seconds before shaking her head. No waiting. I want to marry you today. They found a preacher at the small Methodist church on the edge of town, an elderly man with kind eyes who did not even blink at Zelda's obviously pregnant state. He married them in the church sanctuary with the deputy who had helped Zelda and Mrs. Henderson from the general store as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, just the essential vows exchanged in front of God and these two relative strangers. But when Dawson slipped a simple gold band onto Zelda's finger, she felt a rightness settle into her bones. She was married. She was Zelda Kane now, wife to the man she loved, mother to his unborn child. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. After the ceremony, Dawson insisted they spend the night at the small boarding house in Apache Junction, so Zelda could rest properly before attempting any journey. The proprietor, a widow named Mrs. Shaw, gave them a clean room on the second floor with a real bed and fresh sheets. Zelda nearly wept with gratitude when she saw it. Sleep, Dawson ordered gently after helping her remove her boots and dusty dress. You need to rest after what you put your body through. We should talk about the journey to California. We need to plan. We will plan tomorrow. Right now, you need sleep. He was right, of course. Exhaustion dragged at every part of her body, but as she lay down on the soft mattress, feeling it cradle her aching muscles, she reached for Dawson's hand. Lie with me, just for a little while. He stretched out beside her on top of the covers, and Zelda curled against him as much as her belly would allow. His arms came around her, strong and warm, and she felt safe for the first time in weeks. I thought I had lost you, she whispered into the growing darkness. When I heard about the trial, I thought I was too late. You were not too late. You saved me, Zelda. You rode through the desert pregnant to save my life. I will never forget that. I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you did. You are already worthy. You have always been worthy. She felt him press a kiss to her hair, and then exhaustion finally pulled her under into deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning brought new challenges. Dawson had money saved, but it was not enough for stage passage all the way to California for both of them. They would need to travel partway by stage, and then find work along the way to earn more money for the rest of the journey. We could work in Tucson, Dawson suggested over breakfast in the boarding house dining room. It is only a few days by stage from here, and it is a bigger town. I can find work as a ranch hand or in the stables, and you could do laundry or cooking until the baby comes. Zelda nodded, though the thought of hard labor while heavily pregnant made her want to weep, but they needed to be practical. How long would we need to stay in Tucson to earn enough for the rest of the journey? A few months, probably. Long enough that you might have the baby there. The baby. Zelda pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the reassuring movement inside. That might be for the best, actually. Traveling with a newborn sounds difficult. Everything about this is difficult, Dawson admitted, but we will make it work. Somehow we will make it work. They purchased stage tickets to Tucson that afternoon and left Apache Junction the following morning. As the stage pulled away from the town where Zelda had nearly lost everything, she looked back at the courthouse one last time and said a silent prayer of gratitude. The journey to Tucson took 3 days with overnight stops at way stations along the route. Zelda found the constant jostling of the stage uncomfortable, each bump and lurch sending twinges through her swollen belly. But Dawson stayed close, his arm around her shoulders, cushioning her as much as he could against the rough travel. Tucson sprawled across the desert valley with mountains rising in the distance, bigger and busier than Apache Junction. They found a small room to rent in a boarding house near the edge of town, cheaper than anything closer to the center but clean enough. The landlady, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a Mexican woman who spoke English with a thick accent and looked at Zelda's wedding ring before nodding approval. "You pay on time, you keep room clean, we have no problems," she said firmly. "Baby comes, you let me know, I help with babies many times." Zelda thanked her gratefully, relieved to find someone who seemed kind despite being a stranger. Dawson found work quickly at a large stable near the center of town. The owner needed someone skilled with horses, and Dawson's experience impressed him enough to offer decent wages. It was hard work, long hours in the desert heat, but Dawson never complained. He came home each evening smelling of horse and hay, exhausted but satisfied. Zelda found work taking in laundry from some of the wealthier families in town. It was back-breaking labor, standing over steaming tubs of water in the Arizona heat, scrubbing stubborn stains from expensive dresses and linens. Her belly grew larger as the weeks passed, making it harder to bend over the washing tubs, but she persevered because they needed every cent. At night, they would lie together in their small room, windows open to catch any hint of breeze, and talk about California. Dawson had heard stories about the green valleys and cool ocean air, about opportunities for hardworking people to build good lives. He promised Zelda they would have a real house someday, with a garden and room for their children to play. "Children," Zelda teased, running her hand over her enormous belly. "As in multiple. You want to do this more than once." "I want as many children as you are willing to give me," Dawson said seriously. "I want a whole house full of little ones with your spirit and courage." "That sounds exhausting. That sounds perfect." As October arrived and the worst of the summer heat finally began to ease, Zelda's belly grew so large she could barely move. Mrs. Rodriguez started checking on her daily, bringing special teas she claimed would help with the birth. Dawson hovered anxiously whenever he was home, treating Zelda like she might shatter at any moment. "I am pregnant, not dying," Zelda reminded him when he insisted on carrying her up the stairs after she had gone down to fetch water. "You are carrying my child and I will take care of you both," he countered stubbornly. The baby came on a cool evening in late October with Mrs. Rodriguez and another Mexican woman named Rosa attending the birth. Labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the next day. Zelda had never known pain could be so all-consuming, like her body was being torn apart from the inside. She clutched Dawson's hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers, while Mrs. Rodriguez barked instructions in a mixture of Spanish and English. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, the baby emerged with a furious wail that filled the small room. Mrs. Rodriguez held up a red-faced, screaming infant with satisfaction. "You have a son," she announced. "Strong, healthy boy. A son." Zelda felt tears stream down her face as Mrs. Rodriguez cleaned the baby and placed him in her arms. He was tiny and perfect, with dark hair plastered to his head and his father's nose. When she looked up at Dawson, she saw that he was crying too. "We have a son," she whispered. Dawson knelt beside the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The infant's fingers curled around his, gripping tight, and Dawson made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Zelda. Thank you for giving me this." They named him Thomas, after Dawson's father who had died when Dawson was young. Little Thomas was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in stretches long enough that Zelda could rest. Dawson was completely besotted, rushing home from the stables each evening to hold his son, staring at the tiny face with wonder. "I cannot believe he is real," he said one evening while Thomas slept against his chest. "I cannot believe we made something this perfect." Zelda, exhausted but happy, watched them from the bed. "We did. And now we need to save enough money to get him to California before he is old enough to walk." It took another 2 months before they had saved enough for the next leg of the journey. By then, Thomas was 2 months old and considerably more alert, his dark eyes tracking movement around the room. Saying goodbye to Mrs. Rodriguez was harder than Zelda expected. The older woman had been kind to them, helping with Thomas and never once judging them despite knowing they had married quickly. "You take care of that baby," Mrs. Rodriguez said, kissing Thomas's head. "And you take care of each other. Marriage is hard work, but love makes it worthwhile." They left Tucson in early January of 1884, traveling west by stage toward Yuma. The journey was easier now that Zelda was not pregnant, though traveling with an infant brought its own challenges. Thomas did not like the constant jostling, and made his displeasure known with regular crying fits that made the other passengers shoot them annoyed looks. "I am sorry," Zelda kept apologizing, bouncing Thomas and trying to soothe him. "He is usually such a good baby." "Babies cry," Dawson said, taking Thomas from her so she could rest her arms. "Anyone who does not understand that can ride on top with the driver." From Yuma, they traveled north toward the California border, the landscape gradually changing from harsh desert to something greener and more temperate. When they finally crossed into California, Zelda felt a surge of emotion she had not expected. They had made it. Against all odds, they had traveled hundreds of miles with a newborn baby and arrived in the place they had dreamed about for months. They settled initially in a small town called Riverside, where orange groves stretched in neat rows and the air smelled of citrus blossoms. Dawson found work at a ranch that raised horses, and they rented a small house. Nothing fancy, but it had 2 rooms and a real kitchen. After months in boarding houses, having their own space felt like a luxury beyond measure. Life settled into a new rhythm. Dawson worked long days at the ranch while Zelda cared for Thomas and took in sewing to bring in extra money. They were not wealthy by any means, barely scraping by most months, but they were together and they were happy. Thomas grew rapidly, becoming a chubby, cheerful baby who smiled at everyone. He started sitting up on his own by 6 months, and by his first birthday in October of 1884, he was pulling himself up on furniture and attempting his first wobbly steps. Dawson built him a small wooden horse that Thomas adored, dragging it everywhere he went. "He is going to be a horseman like his father," Zelda observed one evening, watching Thomas feed pretend hay to his wooden horse. "Or a lawyer like you wanted him to be," Dawson countered. "Smart enough to argue his way out of anything." "I never said I wanted him to be a lawyer." "No, but I see how you look at him. You have dreams for him. Big dreams." Zelda did have dreams for Thomas, dreams that he would have opportunities they never had, that he would grow up in a stable home with parents who loved each other, that he would never know the desperation and fear that had marked the first months of his existence. As 1885 arrived, Dawson came home one evening with news that changed everything. The owner of the ranch where he worked had been impressed with his skills and offered him a position as head horse trainer with significantly better wages and a small house on the ranch property. "It is a real house, Zelda," Dawson said, his eyes bright with excitement. 3 rooms and a porch on ranch land with good grazing for horses. The pay is enough that you would not have to take in sewing anymore. You could just focus on Thomas and the home. That sounds too good to be true. I thought so too, but Mr. Patterson is serious. He said I have a gift with horses and he wants to keep me on permanently. This could be our chance, Zelda. Our chance to really build something stable. They moved to the ranch house in March, and Zelda fell in love with it immediately. The house was small but sturdy, with a kitchen that got good light and a bedroom for them and a smaller room for Thomas. The porch overlooked rolling hills dotted with horses, and the air smelled of grass and wildflowers rather than dust and desert heat. For the first time since leaving Silver Creek, Zelda felt like they were truly home. Dawson threw himself into his new position with enthusiasm, working with the horses from early morning until dusk. He had a natural talent for it, a patience and understanding that made even the most temperamental animals calm under his hands. Word spread about his skills, and people began bringing their horses from miles around for him to train. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler who loved following his father around the stables, babbling in his own language to the horses. Dawson made him a small rope and taught him how to pretend to lasso fence posts, and Thomas took to it with glee. "We are going to have to watch him carefully," Zelda said, watching her son toddle around the yard with his rope. "He has no fear." "He is brave like his mother," Dawson said, pulling her close. "Speaking of which, I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "About giving Thomas a brother or sister. I know it has only been a couple of years, but I think about what you said in Tucson about having more children. I meant it, Zelda. I want more little ones. I want our family to grow." Zelda leaned into his embrace, watching Thomas play. The thought of another pregnancy made her nervous after remembering the difficulty of the first. But the thought of giving Thomas siblings, of filling their home with children and laughter, appealed to her deeply. "All right," she said softly. "Let us try for another baby." She became pregnant again that summer, and this time the pregnancy felt different. She was not sick like she had been with Thomas, though she was tired constantly. Dawson fretted over her as much as he had the first time, maybe more now that he knew what childbirth actually entailed. Their daughter was born in early March of 1886, arriving quickly in the middle of the night with only Dawson to help deliver her, since the doctor did not arrive in time. Zelda was terrified through the whole thing, but Dawson stayed calm, his hands steady as he helped their daughter into the world. "A girl," he said, his voice full of wonder as he placed the squalling infant on Zelda's chest. "We have a daughter." They named her Sarah after Zelda's grandmother. She was smaller than Thomas had been, with a head full of dark curls and her mother's nose. Thomas, now 18 months old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly with his chubby toddler hands. "Gentle," Zelda reminded him constantly. "You have to be very gentle with baby Sarah." Their family felt complete in a way Zelda had not expected. She had grown up as an only child, had never imagined having multiple children, but watching Thomas carefully pat Sarah's head while Dawson held them both made her heart swell with love. Life continued to improve gradually over the following years. Dawson's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and Mr. Patterson raised his wages twice. They were able to save money for the first time, putting it away for the children's future. Thomas started at the small school in town when he turned 5, and Sarah grew from a quiet baby into a talkative little girl who followed her brother everywhere. In 1889, when Thomas was 5 and Sarah was 3, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder, her body older now and the exhaustion more profound. But their second son was born healthy in November, and they named him James. He was a big baby with a lusty cry and his father's dark eyes, and Thomas and Sarah were both enthralled with their new brother. "Our family is getting big," Thomas observed one evening, watching his baby brother nurse. "Are we going to have more babies?" Zelda looked at Dawson, who grinned. "Maybe. Would you like more brothers and sisters?" "Yes, I want a whole bunch of them." Zelda laughed despite her exhaustion. "Let us see how we manage with 3 first." As it turned out, 3 became 4 when Zelda became pregnant again in 1891. Their second daughter, Rebecca, was born in early 1892, completing their family. Dawson had to add rooms onto the house to fit everyone, but he did not complain. He built a larger bedroom for the boys to share, and a smaller one for the girls, and he constructed a bigger porch where they could all sit together in the evenings. By 1893, 9 years after they had arrived in California, the Kane family was well established in Riverside. Thomas was 8 years old and already showing his father's talent with horses. Sarah was 6, a bright girl who loved books and asked constant questions. James was 3 and into everything, a whirlwind of energy that kept Zelda constantly on her toes. And Rebecca was a year old, a sweet-natured baby who smiled at everyone. Zelda sometimes looked at her life and marveled at how far they had come from that desperate ride through the desert in 1883. She had been a frightened, pregnant woman facing an uncertain future, riding through the night to save the man she loved. Now she was a mother of 4, married to that same man who had proven himself to be everything she had hoped and more. "You ever think about Apache Junction?" she asked Dawson one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. "About what almost happened there?" "Every day," Dawson admitted. "I think about how close I came to dying, how I would have missed all of this." He gestured at the scene before them, at Thomas showing James how to hold a rope, at Sarah reading to Rebecca in the grass. "I would have missed watching our children grow. I would have missed building this life with you, and it would have been for a crime I did not commit." Justice is a fragile thing. It is. But love is stronger. You proved that when you rode 40 miles pregnant to testify for me. You chose love over safety, over your reputation, over everything. That is what saved me, not the justice system, but your love. Zelda leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun set over the hills. "I would do it again. 1,000 times over I would make that ride." "I know. But I hope you never have to. I hope we just get to enjoy this, our family and our home, for the rest of our lives." It was a good hope, and mostly it came true. Life was not always easy. There were years when money was tight, when the children got sick, and Zelda stayed up all night nursing fevers, when horses kicked Dawson and left him bruised and limping. But they weathered everything together, their love growing stronger with each challenge they faced. Thomas grew into a skilled horseman who started working with his father at the ranch as soon as he was old enough. Sarah became a teacher at the local school, patient with children and brilliant with numbers. James followed his father and brother into horse training, showing a particular gift for working with difficult animals. And Rebecca grew into a gentle young woman who loved nursing injured creatures back to health, eventually becoming a midwife who helped bring new life into the world just as Mrs. Rodriguez had done for her. By the time Dawson and Zelda celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, they had become pillars of the Riverside community. People respected Dawson for his skill and honesty, and they respected Zelda for her strength and kindness. No one in Riverside knew the full story of how they had met, how Zelda had ridden through the desert pregnant to save Dawson from hanging. It was their private history, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. But on quiet evenings when the children were grown and occupied with their own lives, Dawson and Zelda would sit on their porch and remember. They would talk about Apache Junction and the trial, about the 40-mile ride that had saved his life, about the boarding houses and hard work that had brought them to California. "I was so afraid," Zelda admitted one such evening when they were both in their 40s, gray starting to thread through their hair. "When I heard you were going to hang, I was terrified I would be too late. But you were not too late. You arrived exactly when you needed to. What if the judge had not believed me? What if Mrs. Henderson had not remembered seeing us? Then I suppose we would have found out what happens in the next life," Dawson said with a small smile. "But we did not have to find out because you were brave enough to come for me. You saved my life, Zelda. Everything good that has happened since that day I owe to you." "You saved me too," Zelda countered. "You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. Before I met you, I was just drifting through life without direction. You gave me something to fight for." We gave each other something to fight for. That is what love is. Fighting for each other, standing by each other, choosing each other every single day. It was the truest thing he had ever said. Their marriage had not been built on grand gestures or easy romance. It had been built on a desperate ride through the desert, on hard work and sacrifice, on choosing each other again and again through difficulty and doubt. But those foundations had proven stronger than any fairy tale romance could have been. Their grandchildren started arriving in the early 1900s as their children married and began families of their own. Thomas married a rancher's daughter and gave them 2 grandsons and a granddaughter. Sarah married a merchant from town and had twin boys. James married young and had 4 children in rapid succession, filling his house with noise and laughter. And Rebecca married a doctor and had 3 daughters who inherited their mother's gentle nature. Dawson built toys for all the grandchildren, small wooden horses like the one he had made for Thomas years ago. Zelda sewed clothes and told stories, watching history repeat itself as the next generation grew. Their house became the gathering place for Sunday dinners, packed full of children and grandchildren and noise and love. In 1913, 30 years after that fateful day in Apache Junction, Dawson fell ill with pneumonia. He was 52 years old, still strong and vital, but the sickness hit him hard. Zelda nursed him through weeks of fever and delirium, terrified of losing him after they had come so far together. On the worst night, when his fever spiked and his breathing became labored, Zelda sat beside his bed holding his hand and praying harder than she had ever prayed in her life. She thought about that young cowboy she had danced with at a barn dance in Silver Creek, about the man who had been willing to die rather than ask her to risk herself, about the husband who had built her a home and given her a family. "Do not leave me," she whispered into the darkness. "We have more life to live together, more grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to watch. Please do not leave me." Whether it was her prayers or simple luck or just Dawson's stubborn will to live, the fever broke the next morning. His eyes cleared, and when he saw Zelda beside him, he smiled weakly. "Still here," he rasped. "Still here," she agreed, tears streaming down her face. "And you are going to stay here for a very long time." He did. Dawson recovered slowly, regaining his strength over the following months. He was never quite as robust as he had been before the illness, tiring more easily and unable to work the long hours he once had. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered. Thomas took over most of the horse training operations at the ranch, with James assisting. Dawson shifted into an advisory role, teaching the younger generation the skills he had spent a lifetime perfecting. He enjoyed it, this gentler pace of life, spending more time with Zelda and their growing collection of grandchildren. Years continued to pass, marked by harvests and holidays and the endless cycle of life. Children were born, learned to walk and talk, grew up and started their own families. The original house that Dawson and Zelda had moved into back in 1885 had been expanded so many times it barely resembled its original structure. It sprawled across the hillside, rooms added as needed for visiting children and grandchildren. In 1923, 40 years after Zelda's desperate ride through the desert, they celebrated with a party that filled their property. All 4 of their children were there with their spouses and children. Grandchildren played in the yard while great-grandchildren, the oldest only 3 years old, toddled around supervised by their parents. Friends from town came and fellow ranchers and people Dawson had trained horses for over the decades. Standing on their porch looking out at the crowd, Zelda felt overwhelmed by the life they had built. From a single act of courage and love, all of this had grown. 4 children, 16 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren so far, with more surely to come. A home that had sheltered generations, a love that had weathered every storm. "What are you thinking about?" Dawson asked, coming to stand beside her. He moved slower now at 62. His hair completely white and his face lined with age, but his eyes still held the same warmth they had shown her at that first dance decades ago. "I am thinking about that terrified girl who rode through the desert pregnant because she could not imagine a world without you in it. I am thinking about how that single choice led to all of this." She gestured at the celebration before them. "Best choice you ever made," Dawson said with a smile. "Second best," Zelda corrected. "The best choice was saying yes when you asked me to marry you. We have had a good life, haven't we? The best life. Better than I ever imagined possible." He pulled her close, and they stood together watching their family celebrate, knowing that they had built something lasting and true from the ashes of fear and desperation. They would have 8 more years together. 8 more years of watching their family grow and their legacy expand. Dawson died peacefully in his sleep in 1931 at the age of 70, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Zelda held his hand as he slipped away, whispering that she loved him and would see him again someday. She lived another 6 years without him, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. She told them about the Wild West, about Apache Junction and the trial, about the 40-mile ride through the desert that had saved their grandfather's life. She wanted them to know where they came from, what courage and love had built the foundation of their family. Zelda died in 1937 at the age of 73, passing peacefully in the same house where she had raised her children. Her final words were about Dawson, about going to meet him again, about being ready to rest after a life well lived. At her funeral, Thomas stood before the gathered crowd and told the full story of his parents' love. He told them about the murder trial, about his mother riding pregnant through 40 miles of desert to testify on his father's behalf, about the courage it took to risk everything for love. He told them about the years of hard work, about building a life from nothing, about the strength of 2 people who chose each other against all odds. "My father always said that my mother saved his life that day in Apache Junction," Thomas concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "But the truth is they saved each other. They built this family, this home, this legacy through love and determination and an unwillingness to give up on each other. That is what I want us all to remember. That is what I want us to carry forward." The Kane family did carry it forward. The ranch continued to operate for generations, passing from Thomas to his children and eventually to his grandchildren. The house remained standing, carefully maintained and expanded as needed, a testament to the love that had built it. And the story of Zelda's 40-mile ride became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder of what their family was built upon: courage, love, the willingness to risk everything for the people who matter most. These were the values Dawson and Zelda had lived by, and these were the values their descendants carried into the future, knowing that the truest legacy anyone could leave was a family bound together by love strong enough to weather any storm.